Hi there. My name's Matthew Saunders, and I'm going to do a series of short videos and social media posts about neurodivergence called My Neurodivergent Brain. I'm going to do one or two each week, and I'd love for you to subscribe to my YouTube channel and follow me on Twitter, and I hope my insights are interesting. I've known since I was very small that I was different. We didn't call it neurodivergence back then or learning differences. People like me were called learning disabled. And my disabilities were considered bad enough that I was legally entitled to accommodations from the Canadian and Ontario governments where I lived at the time. In 2019, I did a presentation at DrupalCon Amsterdam that touched on my neurodivergence while telling the story of my journey. It was called Pivot Points, Recognizing Opportunity, Turning Challenges to Strengths. I'd spent quite a few years at that point researching my own daughter's challenges. We'd adopted her from social services at the age of 5, and her experiences before she came to us were traumatic. So I read and went to classes and seminars because I needed to understand as much as I could about her neurodivergence. During this research, I had light bulb after light bulb after light bulb going off in my head as I recognized a lot about myself. And in a very real way, if it hadn't been for my daughter, I would have just continued coping, and I would have never understood my own ADHD and dyslexia. And I certainly wouldn't have come to the explosive realization that I was on the autism spectrum. For me, I figured out most of my coping mechanisms by the time I went to university in 1989, and a few I didn't sort out until I had cancer in 2000. But the truth is, I really didn't understand why I was different until much later. My personal epiphanies occurred between 2005 and 2017. And since then, I've spent time reflecting and refining my own self-understanding. Now, in that Amsterdam presentation, I talked about my journey to being a technology leader despite challenges. A large reason my journey was challenging was my lack of diagnosis of my cognitive differences. And later, I also had a battle with cancer as a young man that profoundly changed the way I see the world. That cancer, in a very strange way, might well be related to my learning differences, and I'll talk about that in a future podcast. I'm lucky because my parents saved many of the diagnostic documents that were prepared for me in the 70s and 80s. And what this practically means is that I can now filter those documents through the lens of the 21st century's understanding of mental health morbidities. And I also want to say, this is my lived experience. I'm giving you insights into what worked for me and where my primary struggles have landed. And while there are recognizable patterns for folks who are neurodivergent, every single one of us is different. That said, I'm going to try to generalize my observations because the main goal of these talks is to help people who are neurotypical understand atypicals a bit better and provide some insight into how you can better relate and communicate to both from the typical and the atypical point of view.